the Wednesday edition of A Proud Malcontent on the 20th of August 2025. Just showing off that I can read the calendar these days. And welcome to a very hot and sunny Perth where you can't walk along the streets for folk frying eggs on the pavement. So they tell me. Not that I get out to experience it, I'm too busy here dealing with various bits and pieces of nonsense online. Speaking of which, that is the topic of today's presentation, today's show. The a contrast between I don't really plan these shows; they're not scripted. Perhaps you can tell. Uh, uh, no, it's because I like to keep it flexible because things turn up at the last minute, situations change. There's new developments. But the only thing I found worthy of a mention on the national website today was Stuart MacDonald has tabled a resolution in the Scottish Parliament, which is basically about stop taking the name of the monarch out of the parliamentary oath, the oath that MSPs have to swear, so that they're no longer swearing allegiance to King Charles III of England. And I don't expect that to get anywhere, but it's just gesture politics. But some gestures are worth making, and I think this falls into that category. It is a gesture worth making. So, well done, Stuart. It's good to see you. I'm not quite sure what John Swinney will think of that. It's almost like rocking the boat. Oh, naughty. Right, so on to as I said, I don't script these things. I'm always expecting, and I just do it off the cuff from whatever's happening in Scotland at the time, as reported usually in the National, sometimes elsewhere, but it's usually the National. But I have a fallback. In case I find myself drying up after only 10 minutes, and facing the prospect of 50 minutes and nothing to say, I do have a fallback. Yeah, if you're a writer and you think the blank page syndrome is bad, try facing 50 minutes of a live broadcast when you can't think of a word to say. Yeah, that's even more of a horror. But I have a fallback, and what I would go to normally is an article that I've written, a blog article that I've written, either a recent one, or that same day very often, or one from the past, which I think is worth looking at again and worth sharing with you again, and sharing in a spoken form, as I know that many people prefer that. So today, and because of something in the National, on the letters page, which as often as not is the most interesting part of the newspaper. But there was something in the letters page which kind of triggered me today. And I'd already been thinking about presenting this old article called "The New Thinking," which is about how people who have started to decolonize their minds have also begun to reframe the whole constitutional issue. I call it the new thinking on the issue. This article has been, it must be the most referenced article I've ever written, which is rather gratifying. I know Professor Alf Baird, shares it quite a lot, which is very flattering, very flattering. So I was going to read that article today. That was that was what I had for you today. And then I saw this letter in the National, and it really got my back up. That's why I put a warning on this show that there may be swearing because the letter was from a party loyalist. There is no other way to put it. One of these people for whom it's my party, right or wrong, and it contrasted so sharply, so starkly with the new thinking that I thought it might be interesting to do a comparison. So, bearing in mind that we're playing this by ear, I'm going to put up articles so that you can see actually reading what was published, and I will just run through it for you. If I can get the mouse in the right place. The New Thinking. This was an article first published on the 27th of August 2023, so almost 2 years ago. I would have sworn it was just last year. There is, I venture to state, a widespread, if not general, acceptance within the Yes movement that one of the positives of the 2014 referendum campaign was the normalisation of the word independence, even if the actual concept was little examined. A term that had previously been consigned to the ideological fringe found currency in mainstream political discourse, there to remain. It might also be suggested that there was some normalization too of the word referendum, and thereby of the idea of direct democracy. Again, there was little discussion of what a proper constitutional referendum should look like, and the idea of a referendum was not much linked to the wider concept of direct democracy. But it can hardly be denied that the referendum campaign had a normalising effect. I confidently contend that we are seeing a similar normalisation process in relation to other words and the ideas associated with them. I offer 3 examples of terms and concepts which have only lately entered the lexicon of the debate around the constitutional issue. I also contend that the process of normalisation in these instances has been both remarkably rapid in some quarters and inexplicably slow in others. The 3 terms are, in no particular order, Unilateral Declaration of Independence, UDI, Colony, and Liberation. Scottish UDI. I have previously written and frequently spoken of my pleasant surprise when I presented my thoughts on UDI to the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group conference, almost exactly a year previous to this article being written on 29th of August 2022. I had expected considerable resistance to the idea, even if the audience was too sophisticated for the all too common knee-jerk reaction to the term UDI that is the product of years of conditioning. I was taken aback by the response, which actually greeted my remarks. Respectful, if scowling silence while I spoke might have been the best I thought might be expected. In fact, what I saw was people nodding in agreement. There was even the odd smattering of applause, if I recall aright. In the years since then, I have seen further confirmation of the normalisation of the idea of Scottish UDI. There is even some agreement with my stated view that Scottish UDI is the only way Scotland's independence will be restored. We may be getting to the stage where it is those who react with the traditional negativity who look outdated in their thinking. Or to put it another way, they have yet to catch up with the new thinking on the constitutional question. I should just add a little interjection here at the moment. But when I talked of this was 2 years ago, I remember, and I was talking within a year. Here we are 2 years later, and on the subject of the normalisation of the concept of Scottish UDI, we have seen it even normalised to the point where there was a resolution submitted to the SNP's October conference, which was actually based on and informed by the same thinking as informs Scottish UDI. So it was that is the extent to which it has become normalised. Of course, it has not become normalised sufficiently for any of the political parties to actually be looking at it, far less discussing it, and certainly not normalised sufficiently for the Newington resolution, as it's called, to make it onto the SNP conference agenda. Although, I may speak too soon. It's only a provisional agenda at the moment. And at the moment, there's only the leadership resolution on the constitutional issue there. It may well be that in 4 or 5 weeks, whatever, the full resolution, the final agenda, I should say, will include at least one resolution opposed to or contesting the leadership resolution, the resolution under the names of John Swinney and Keith Brown. To go on with the article, Scotland the colony. While I might justifiably claim some small credit for contributing to the normalisation of UDI, there can be no disputing where credit goes for normalisation of the idea of Scotland as a colony of England as Britain. A rather clumsy sentence there, but I think you know what I mean. Professor Alf Baird's work demonstrating the applicability of the term colony to Scotland has been hugely influential. I can testify to this as I am one of those who have been hugely influenced. I was long resistant to suggestions that Scotland has been colonised, but as I read Alf Baird's arguments, I found myself quite unable to refute them. Everything that he says about what constitutes a colony, I recognised as applying to Scotland. For example, here's this quote from a piece by Alf Baird called Scotland's Colonial Status. He says, colonialism is not that difficult to understand. Colonialism is first and foremost economic plunder. Everything is taken from the country cheaply. Oil and gas, energy, aggregates, food, whiskey, with goods sold back to the natives at higher cost. The role of a colony is primarily to serve the needs of the mother country, in this case, England. Who can deny the truth of that? I was and remain uncomfortable with some aspects of Alf Baird's argument, particularly his observation that settler occupation is a defining characteristic of colonisation, and that this holds true for Scotland as elsewhere. While I may find this unsettling, it is impossible when confronted with the facts to dispute that demographics represent a significant factor affecting measured support for restoration of independence versus retention of the Union. Nor can it sensibly be denied that this significance is increasing. Whether it is a purposeful colonising ploy really doesn't matter. Deliberate or coincidental, the impact on Scotland's cause remains the same. This is an issue that has to be approached with a great deal of sensitivity. But we owe a debt of gratitude to Alf Baird for bringing it into the light. For too long, there have been aspects of Scotland's predicament which were held to be taboo topics by supporters as well as opponents of Scotland's cause. Such matters must not be left to fester. They must be confronted and debated, hopefully with less than the customary vitriol. That is why it's so important that these terms and the ideas to which they refer are normalised. This seems to be happening is one of the more promising portents for Scotland's cause. Remember, please, that this was written 2 years ago. The third term that I want to address, just as soon as I've had a little drink, my throat is beginning to go. Excuse me. The third term I want to address is liberation. Just as I flinched from the idea of Scotland as a colony, so I was reluctant to accept the suggestion that the people of Scotland are unfree, implied by use of the term liberation. I recognise that oppression can take many forms and need not involve violent coercion to be defined as such. Even if there is a sense in which people in Scotland are placed in a sort of captivity by the Union, nobody in Scotland feels confined or constrained in a way that would commonly be associated with oppression. They sure as hell don't feel enslaved. My attitude to the term liberation changed dramatically as I came to recognise that it was not the people per se who were the captives of colonisation, but Scotland's political and cultural institutions. It is our government and our parliament and our civil service and our language and our media and our history which have been captured in a process of surreptitious colonisation over a period of 3 centuries and more. It is these institutions which demand to be liberated if Scotland is to be a normal independent nation. When we talk of colonised minds, we refer to the long-term effect of the capture of all the fundamental apparatus of one nation by another. This effect is inevitable, insidious, and intellectually incapacitating, in that the colonised mind can only think like a colonised mind, while vigorously rejecting the suggestion that it has been colonised. The grip of the coloniser is broken, but not completely removed, when the capacity to think outside the wee British box is triggered, often by some sudden realisation in the course of debate, either as a participant or as an observer. The process of decolonisation of the mind begins here. It can be a protracted process with many setbacks, a process which is different for every individual. I would hypothesize that for those affected, decolonisation of the mind is a process which is never completed. Generations may have to pass before the effect of colonisation of the mind is eradicated from Scotland's population. People will have to be born and live their lives in an environment of liberated political and cultural institutions in order to have the possibility of being free of the effects of 3 centuries of creeping colonization. Even then, they are likely to be infected by the still partially colonized minds of parents and other older people in their environment. It stands to reason that normalization of the term and idea of liberation is essential if enough minds are to be sufficiently decolonized to recognize that the basic apparatus of Scotland, the nation, has been captured by a foreign power and fight to restore all our political and cultural institutions to the service of Scotland and its people rather than the ruling elites of England as Britain. That this normalisation appears to be happening is therefore a promising sign. For this, we have once again to thank Alf Baird, but also Sarah Sawyers and everyone else involved with Salvo and Liberation Scotland. And of course, the Stirling Directive, even if the latter involves some very muted blowing of my own trumpet as a member of the group which drafted the Stirling Directive. The new thinking. What is discussed and described above is what I call the new thinking in relation to Scotland's constitutional issue. The terms and concepts referred to are all essential components of this new thinking. Unfortunately, the capacity to reconceptualize Scotland's cause in any meaningful way totally eludes Scotland's own political establishment. With vanishingly rare exceptions, all the Scottish, not British, politicians and parties defer to the alien concept of parliamentary sovereignty, even while mouthing the sovereignty of Scotland's people as if that concept were nothing more than an electoral campaign slogan. All this implies is that the process of retaking the institutions which define our distinctive political culture and national identity must be driven by the people. This too is part of the new thinking. Thanks to the research undertaken by Sarah Salyers and others, we now know that the legal and constitutional route to independence exists. That it does not exist in the legal and constitutional framework imposed on Scotland by the colonising power should not be at all surprising. I shall eschew further comment on those who maintained that this non-existent route was the democratic gold standard. I shall even restrain myself from passing judgment on those who yet adhere to this old thinking, despite all the real world developments which point up the idiocy of doing so. That the legal and constitutional route does exist in Scotland's own legal and constitutional environment will be news to most people, I suspect. It certainly was a revelation to me. My hope is that this new thinking will spread and gain traction such that not even the politicians who are well practiced in turning a deaf ear and blind eye to the people are unable to brush it off in their customary high-handed fashion. How else might Scotland be rescued from colonisation? That's surprising. That resonates so well with me. I almost always forget what I've written in the past, and revisiting it sometimes, I get quite surprised. I find myself agreeing with myself. I also find, let's see, the places where I was wrong, or mistaken. I saw this normalization process and the decolonization of minds. I saw it picking up pace, and I envisaged it becoming a mainstream movement within the independence movement. But that hasn't really happened. The new thinking is still very much in the minority in the independence movement. There are still far too many people who are uh, uh, stuck with the old thinking, the thinking that from colonized minds. And typically, they are the people that I refer to as the the party loyalists. It goes without saying, obviously, that unionists, their minds are totally colonized, but they have yet to ask questions about the union. That's why they're unionists. And then there are British nationalists who insist that questions should never be asked about the union. So we can forget about them. Unionists, well, yeah, there's maybe the possibility that something will happen to cause them to rethink their attitude to the union. What that might be, especially after a year or so of the Starmer regime, just what it would be that put them off. After that, and all that went before it, with Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Sunak, everything that went before, everything over the last 10 years, everything over the last 30 years, if you want to go back that far. If that hasn't made unionists think again about their attitude to the union, you have to wonder what will. There's, I mean, they're a regime that turns a blind eye, actually actively supports genocide in Gaza. It's hard for me to see how anybody could prefer that to being an independent nation. But it's within the Yes movement itself, within the independence movement, there are still colonized minds. Within the SNP leadership, I would say that they're all colonized and very thoroughly colonized, almost as colonized as the unionist mind. They're incapable of thinking outside that wee British box. And that these people exist among the membership also. And they tend to be the party loyalists. My party, right or wrong, party before country. You know the type that I mean. And it was a letter in the National today that really provoked me to talk about these party loyalists. It's a letter from Nick Cole, who I don't know. I want to make it quite clear. This is uh, some people will portray it as an attack on Nick Cole. I don't know Nick Cole, other than having a few exchanges with him on social media. I don't know the guy. As far as I'm aware, I've never met him. So it's not an attack on him, but it most certainly is an attack on the ideas and attitudes that he promulgates. And this letter is just such a clear example of the party loyalist, the person who puts party before country and cause. It's such a good example that I thought it would be interesting to read it out. And if you can, contrast it with the new thinking that I spoke of just a moment ago. I'll now read Nick Cole's letter in the National dated 19th August 2025. I shall first take a small drink of water, if I may. Excuse me. Trust me, I wish that wasn't water. Nick Cole's letter. The headline letter in Saturday's National, that was a letter under the heading, SNP leadership has built an indie strategy that cannot deliver. By the way, I hate the term indie. I detest it. It's independence. I- Indie, okay, yeah, maybe in the likes of Twitter, X, where or Mastodon, wherever, if the number of characters, if there's a character limit, yeah, you've got an excuse. But otherwise, no. The word is independence. Sorry, a little side rant there. The headline letter in Saturday's National is only partially true. Yes, the SNP have created a strategy, but as to whether or not it can deliver is at best speculative, and that negative heading is based more on frustration than anything else. Mhm. Already I'm starting to get annoyed. As an incumbent administration and being at the core of the cause for a very long time, they, the party leadership, one presumes, are fully aware of the practical limitations and constraints of the various possibilities that people promote. Therefore, their plan is already couched in terms of what is achievable. That's just, that's illogical. Dear. Of course, there are always lots of fancy ideas of what people wish were workable, but they will not have any better chance of success than the ones that actually take account of the forces arrayed against us. Trying to diminish any other plans other than the leadership one. This does not necessarily mean that ideas are summarily dismissed. No, forbid. But as with any strategy, the individual steps are the most important and hence critical. All plans have to be subject to the test of practicality. And that is what the SNP have been doing for many decades, and particularly since the last Labour administration. That's that has no. I've got to respond to that. Uh, the strategy that he's referring to is this a strategy which involves doing exactly the same as was done in 2012 to 2014. Exactly the same. The strategy consists of nothing other than asking nicely if the British Prime Minister will give John Swinney permission to organise a referendum that isn't really a referendum, an independence referendum that is a sham, that is it's conditional and it is consultative only, and it is non-self-executing. In other words, it's a glorified opinion poll, a glorified attitude study. That is the SNP strategy, to ask Westminster if we can please have a glorified attitude survey. It has nothing to do with independence. Independence cannot come from a Section 30 referendum. And asking for a Section 30 referendum is an act of treachery. But I won't get into that at the moment. I just thought it's essential to make it clear what strategy Nick Cole is referring to here. And he also makes this point that all plans have to be subject to the test of practicality. And that is what the SNP have been doing for many decades, and particularly since the last Labour administration. Because that makes no sense. If that strategy had been subject to the test of practicality and been found to be practical, then why the hell didn't it work at some point within the last decade? Eh? Why didn't it work? If it's been subject to the test of practicality, here's the test of practicality of John Swinney's strategy. He asks for a Section 30 order. Starmer says no. End of. That's it. There is no subsequent plan. There is nothing that leads on from that. Nothing in the strategy about that. Only that the SNP can then go on for another 5 years saying, "Oh, you have to vote for us for independence." But it's this bit about having spent 10 years with testing their strategies as to their practicality. And they've all failed the ultimate test of practicality. They haven't worked. For 10 bloody years, they haven't worked. Right, I'll have to go on. There are two critical things that complainers ignore. Now, we're complainers now. We're not critics. We're complainers. The first is that regardless of whichever plan is pursued, and it may require running several plans in parallel. Oh, God, that's an idiotic notion. They all absolutely must be, as a prerequisite, they all absolutely must, as a prerequisite, have the support of a recognizable majority of voters at the time of being tested, which is in the absence of a referendum based on elections. That is, that the being tested is based on elections. What's he doing here? What is he doing? He's doing exactly what the SNP leadership are doing. He is making the holding of a referendum, a proper constitutional referendum, not a Section 30. He is making the holding of any kind of referendum conditional on having won that referendum first. He's making it conditional on the support for independence according to polls or elections, which are not referendums, the support for independence already having been won. So it's self-defeating. It can go on. That can go on forever. We can't have a referendum until we've won it. I don't know. I have difficulty getting my head around that kind of stupidity. Without such a majority, no plan is ever going to get off the ground, regardless of whoever's ghost is leading it. Right, that whoever's ghost remark is a snide remark about Alex Salmond, I think, and a dig at Alapart. Well, fair enough. But this idea that no plan is going to get off the ground until it's already succeeded, that's no more clever than the "we can't have a referendum until we've won it" argument. The plan itself must include a plan to get the support. The plan itself, the campaign, must be a campaign to raise the support. The plan should take it all the way through from winning more support to using that support in a democratic exercise. It's to say that we can't have a plan until the support is already there just makes no sense at all. When he's talking about the other plans, he says that a minority appeal to the UN or a minority appeal to the UN or EU or whoever gets nowhere other than an acknowledgement that there are some people wishing for a change. Well, yeah, that's not true. It just isn't true. I take it here he's very reluctant to say what it is and to be upfront about it, but he seems to be talking about the Salvo Liberation.Scot approach to the UN, that initiative. And he says we get nothing out of it other than an acknowledgement that there are some people wishing for a change. Well, we already have that acknowledgement. Every poll acknowledges that. Every election acknowledges that. There is somewhere just short of 50% of the population regularly voting in a way that suggests they wish for change, and getting nowhere by doing so. And the UN initiative, the Salvo Liberation UN initiative, if it succeeds, which I think there's a very good chance that it will, if it succeeds, it gets a lot more than just an acknowledgement that there are some people wishing for a change. If it succeeds, it gets Scotland recognised as a non-self-governing territory. That changes the situation dramatically. It changes the constitutional issue dramatically. It does not in itself bring about independence. It does not. I know a lot of people believe that it does. It doesn't. What it does is provides a powerful augmentation of a political and parliamentary process and internal to Scotland, which does the actual work of raising the support and holding a referendum, a proper constitutional referendum that will actually stand as the exercise by the people of Scotland of our right of self-determination. That case, that whole process is strengthened by the fact that Scotland has been put on the UN list of non-self-governing territories. It limits massively the amount of interference that there will be from the mother country or the administering power, as UN terminology has it. I'm talking England as Britain, Westminster, Downing Street, whatever. You know, they will still try and interfere, obviously, but they will be directed by the UN. And the fact that Scotland's a non-self-governing territory, they will be directed to not interfere. So when they do, yeah, they're breaching the terms of the UN Convention. So it's a lot more than just an indication of some people wishing for a change. That's an attempt to belittle the people who are responsible for this initiative, and they do not deserve that. They bloody well don't. You see, I'm getting angry now. So, secondly, complainers must also bear in mind what we will end up with if they continue to undermine the SNP. Oh, here comes the blackmail. Nothing but, at best, a unionist Labour administration, or even worse, one that is reform/Tory. Ordinary voters will, unless they are long-term politically astute, invariably vote in accordance with their more immediate needs based around their perception of the parties on offer. So exactly what do the anti-SNP activists think they are achieving? Right, comment on this. Anti-SNP activists, I can assure you, Nick Cole includes me in that category of what he calls anti-SNP activists. I am not anti-SNP. I'm a realist. And as things stand, sorry, I'm talking to you, you should be able to see me. As things stand, you cannot be anti-SNP and pro-independence. It's simply not possible to be anti-independent, anti-SNP and pro-independence. You can be non-SNP and pro-independence. You can be SNP critical and be pro-independence, but you can't be an SNP hater and be pro-independence, for the simple reason that we are stuck with the SNP, whether we like it or not. That's why they're in the position to try and blackmail us the way that Nick Cole tries to do in his letter. Vote for us or you get the unionists, you get the British parties. And that is probably true. It is probably true. Most people, according to the polls, I'm fairly relaxed about this because, according to the polls, the SNP is going to be the biggest party again, and probably the party of government. We get some reassurance from the polls that we will be safe. The SNP is, if it's doing nothing else, and it really isn't doing anything else on the constitutional issue, if it's no use for the constitutional issue, at least is useful as a barrier preventing the British parties taking power. That's the only purpose. And I would confess, I would feel constrained to vote SNP. I'd feel I was forced to vote SNP if my vote was the choice between SNP and the British parties. Even though I am as critical of the SNP as any of the SNP haters, although I spell out the grounds for my criticism more than they tend to do, despite my criticism, despite the fact that I see John Swinney's plan, John Swinney's strategy as an act of treachery, betraying both the country and the cause, then I would still feel forced to vote for them if the only alternative was the British parties. So you cannot describe me as an anti-SNP. What that is, what Nick Cole is doing there, is just trying to dismiss SNP critics by calling them complainers. And by saying that they're irresponsible because they haven't thought it through enough to know that being anti-SNP opens the risk of the British parties taking power. Well, it's not much of a risk, but it is a risk, and so we have to be mindful of it. But the whole thing about being anti-SNP is nonsense. That's him trying to belittle, diminish people like myself who are quite genuine critics of the SNP. We have criticisms of them. We have things to say. Now, if Nick Cole had the wits, then he would address these criticisms. He would try and explain the things that remain unexplained, like what does the SNP, what does an SNP government do once Starmer knocks them back? Perhaps more to the point, what if Starmer preempts a request by offering a Section 30 order? Yeah. Because that would be an even worse situation. That would stymie John Swinney for a start. He'd be forced to accept that. And he'd have to accept it on whatever conditions Starmer subsequently applied. It would be an unwinnable referendum for us. We couldn't win it. Not that we could win it anyway, because it isn't a real constitutional referendum. It's a glorified attitude survey. I suppose we must go back and finish Nick Cole's letter. Where are we? So exactly what do the anti-SNP activists think they are achieving? Well, obviously we're achieving nothing because we're criticising the SNP and the SNP are not responding to the criticisms. This is not the SNP leadership. This is Nick Cole, who I suppose must be an SNP member. I don't know. But he's certainly an SNP supporter. He's certainly a party loyalist. We're critical. These criticisms have never been addressed by the leadership. There are huge, very pertinent criticisms of the Section 30 process, the whole Sturgeon doctrine that the only way, the only route to independence is the one that the British state controls completely. And that just makes no sense whatsoever. Let me get back and finish this letter, please. It can't come fast enough. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to have another drink. The angry ranting is thirsty work. I thank you for that. And back to the letter. Voters will only look as far as the fact that even the so-called independent supporters cannot agree with each other and base their choice around that. Criticism is one thing, but the creation of workable plans and strategies demands working together. And if people think that arguing against the SNP is likely to make them fall in line with whichever minority shouty group is around, then they are being naive. And if Nick Cole thinks people are going to stop criticising an SNP strategy that cannot work, it cannot pass any test of practicality, then he's naive. In fact, he's downright bloody stupid. And he talks about workable plans and strategies. What he's saying basically here is that we have to accept the SNP's plans and strategies and no other. And even if we have a much better strategy, we should not be arguing for it. We should not be comparing it with the SNP strategy. We should not be doing anything to question or undermine John Swinney's resolution, John Swinney's strategy. We shouldn't be doing anything. We should just shut up, basically. If we can't give the SNP a standing ovation, then we should just sit quietly in a corner somewhere. That's Nick Cole's idea of cooperation. No, I'm afraid not. Yeah, people aren't going to be quiet. People are looking on and they're watching John Swinney making a total arse of it, a total arse of Scotland's cause. And people are not going to be quiet. This people ain't going to be quiet. That's a certainty. Last paragraph. The SNP have the experience and detailed knowledge of the situation and are best placed to produce the plan. Oh dear. Oh dear. Show me some evidence for the SNP having the experience and detailed knowledge. All the SNP have ever exhibited is a total inability to think strategically and totally closed minds when it comes to alternative perspectives or novel ideas. They just shut everything out. They cannot possibly have experience and detailed knowledge because they don't even look at the situation. They don't look at the ideas. They don't debate anything. It's the leadership's diktat, and that is it. That is not to be questioned. So, experience and detailed knowledge. The only thing the SNP has in terms of the constitutional issue, I have to keep saying that, in terms of the constitutional issue, the SNP's only experience is the experience of failure. It has failed. I would say it has actually betrayed Scotland's cause. And if it hasn't yet betrayed Scotland's cause, then it's proposing to do so with John Swinney's dreadful, woeful, abysmal strategy. Going on. Such a plan is also tested by those arrayed against us who are in fact the only ones preventing the plans from succeeding. The progress has been stalled not by the SNP, but by the Unionists, who also happen to be supported, hopefully unintentionally, by those among us arguing against the SNP. Well, we're back to that blackmail thing. And don't criticise us or you get branded a dupe of the unionists. And it's a lie anyway. Progress has not been stalled by the unionists. The unionists don't have the power to stall it. The unionists in the Scottish Parliament don't have the power. They're in the minority. There has been a nominally pro-independence party in government for, I think it's approaching 18 years. Nominally pro-independence, 18 years. Certainly for the past 10, going on 11 years. And they have done nothing. There has been no progress whatsoever. And it's their job to make that progress. That's what they're there for. That's why we vote for them, to make progress. And they've totally failed to make that progress. Why? Because they allow the British state a veto over progress. They acknowledge the British state's right to veto progress. That's what stalled it. It's not the veto itself, which has no worth whatsoever. It carries no weight whatsoever, other than the weight the government chooses to give it. It's the Scottish Government's responsibility to ensure that our right of self-determination is respected and facilitated, the exercise of it facilitated. The Scottish Government is failing and has failed in that responsibility for years, for a decade minimum. And it's the Scottish Government's fault. It's not Westminster and it's not the British parties squatting in the Scottish Parliament. None of them can stop the Scottish Government, backed by at least 50% of the population, from doing something to make progress. And if they did something to make progress, then that support would very rapidly rise well above 50%. But Nick Gold's argument is that they can't do anything until that support is actually there. It makes less and less sense the more you think about it. Progress stalled not by the SNP but the unionists. Rubbish. And the unionists seize on that disunity. Do they? Well, I don't see them seizing on it at all. As far as the unionists are concerned, independence is all about the SNP. That's the way it's been portrayed. It's all about the SNP. Unionists, Westminster, the British parties in Parliament, they show no interest whatever in the smaller parties. Precious little interest in Alapa, even. And absolutely no interest in the likes of ISP or any of the other fringe, nominally pro-independence parties. So, I don't recall ever hearing any unionist talking about how disunited the independence movement is. Because as far as they're concerned, it's entirely about the SNP. And the SNP isn't disunited at all. They're all locked into John Swinney. They're all locked into their leadership. It's more like a cult than a political party. It's as bad as it was under Sturgeon. Unintentionally by those among us arguing. And unionists seize on that disunity. No, they don't. No, they haven't. No, they won't. United we stand, divided we fall. Oh, we're into cliches now. Fair enough. Produce a different party to elect after we have independence, but let us achieve that goal first. Well, that would be fine, Nick, if there was the slightest possibility that your party, the SNP, would achieve independence. All the evidence suggests that they won't. The evidence of experience tells us quite markedly, signally that they won't. They haven't. When conditions, by their own account, were ideal, they haven't done anything. What reason is there to expect them to do anything? I would suggest that there is none. And now we're drawing towards time up. So I have to say my goodbyes. I have to tell you that we will be back, and Stephen Duncan will join me, and we'll be looking again at this whole business of the franchise, and Stephen will be crunching some numbers to help us on that. For now, goodbye.